Please welcome to the stage Walburga Hemetsberger, CEO of SolarPower Europe, and Oana Penu, Director of InnoEnergy Skills Institute, for a conversation with Bloomberg's Olivia Rudgard.
Okay, hello everyone. Thanks for joining us. So we're here to talk about green jobs, green skills. We've got some really interesting perspectives. I have to say, as a journalist, when I'm talking about any sector as it relates to green skills, jobs, it always comes up every single time. So I'm really interested to hear what our panelists have to say. Walburga, can you tell us about the specific challenges that you see in solar? Sort of how does this jobs skills challenge manifest itself in your sector?
First of all, we're a sector that is growing enormously. We've been on an incredible growth trajectory over the past couple of years. 40% growth in the last 3 years, year on year. And it also translates into jobs that are provided by our sector, but that we also need to find. So last year, at the end of last year, the solar sector in Europe employed some 800,000 people. Which is also already a great number when I tell you that a year before we had 560,000, and in 2 years' time, end of 2025, we need to have 1 million workers in our sector, and 1.3 in 2027. So you see that that is a huge opportunity for Europe because it offers a lot of employment, but we also need to find those jobs, and we need to make sure that we have the right skills. It's a whole bundle of skills that we need. So because everyone's just thinking about solar installers when you think about solar, but it's a whole bundle of skills that we need in order to sustain the growth.
Yeah, no, and I should have said actually before we started, if you want to ask questions, we'd love to take your questions. So I think there's a QR code behind my head somewhere. So please feel free to send questions. It's a really good topic. I think hopefully people will have good questions. So that's a really good introduction. Oana, can we set the scene a bit here? So what type of industrial challenges are we seeing as a broader context to some of the really big numbers that industries like Walburga are needing?
Yes, I think it is important to realize that Europe, and I think the worldwide, it's the tipping point in our evolution. We are passing from an era to another era. And we are going where we talk a lot in Europe about reindustrialization and reshoring manufacturing in Europe in a lot of industries, such as batteries, solar, PV, but also hydrogen, and so on and so forth. And overall, we are looking in 2030 to create 18 million new jobs. But in order to create these jobs, we have to really look at 4 major trends that we are seeing at the moment. First and foremost, we really need to look at the volume and ask ourselves the question, do we have this number of people, of workers available in Europe today and tomorrow? So this is a tremendous, tremendous challenge. So if we look at the projection from the industry, just in the battery sector, which I'm very familiar with, we see a growth in the targets from 70 gigawatt hour in 2022 to 300 gigawatt hour to 2025. 2025 in industry time, it's tomorrow. So how are we going to manufacture this capacity? Who is going to manufacture this capacity? And it is really, let's say, critical to understand that for every gigawatt hour of capacity that is produced, we need around 100 people. So it is, I leave up to you to make the math, but we are already down almost 1 million people only in the battery sector in Europe today. So first challenge, remember, volume. We miss people, we need to bring people in. The second challenge is the skill typology and the evolution of the skills. The skills are the type of skills are moving very, very fast. So I invite you to do an experiment. Go on LinkedIn, type a job profile, for example, cell assembly technician, and see how this job or solar panel installer and see how this job it is described, how this job role it is described. Do the same exercise in 3 months' time, or better yet in 6 months' time. See if the same requirements will be there. I can already tell you we are monitoring that in real time with AI technology, and we see that there's a definition of the job roles and the skill required. It is changing very, very fast because the technology is changing very fast. Therefore, we need to prepare the skills and the job roles of tomorrow today to be able to address this challenge. And the third challenge is the time. We are against a tremendous time pressure. The education system at all levels, it is not yet fully up to speed to address this challenge. In order to create certified programs, we need 2 years, and then the person needs to spend 2 to 3 years to take and to graduate. And we need this million people today, only in one sector, and million others in other sectors. So how are we going to address this time pressure under which we are on in? And of course, in Europe, it's also a question of migration and the mobility of the worker, because we know we have pool of talent in sectors which are phasing out, such as let's say fisheries or carbon industries, and can be reskilled and repurposed for other industry. But there is a language barrier and a cultural barrier. So that's things that we need really to look at cross-sectoral and tackle that in a very, very realistic manner. But I think it is not only about challenges, I think it's also about opportunities. And I think we need to look at ourselves of the history, what we have learned, and think, do we really want to go back into that industrial society where people were exploited and were not happy? And how does the future job in manufacturing looks like? And more fundamental question, do human beings want to really do a manufacturing job?
Interesting. Okay, yeah. I mean, you know, if we're thinking about the solar sector, there are certain jobs that we have to have human beings do, right? You can't have a robot go on top of a roof and put a panel in, or can you? I don't know.
Not yet. No, indeed. I mean, there's a number of jobs where we need workers, and where we also want to give decent green jobs to workers in Europe. So first of all, you know, what we try to do as a sector, and I should maybe explain that we're representing the whole solar sector in Europe, so from manufacturing to deployment and beyond recycling, so with more than 300 members. So what we're trying to do is really make advertisement for the great opportunities that we have already to start with. So I love my solar job, also here in this audience, and to highlight with job reports, with job trade fairs, where we bring together job seekers and companies, but also with being active on TikTok in order to reach out to the young people to join our sector. So that's what we're doing from our side. But then it needs a partnership with public actors, because what we need to do as well is to map out the skill needs that we have everywhere. So we need to. So we're calling for a EU observatory of green jobs, for example, to really take the possibility. I mean, really map basically what we need first of all, and then you can build on that basis training programs. Certification is one of the things that we would love to see. Belgium is doing that. For example, they are certifying solar workers in order to make sure that, you know, also the right quality is delivered. So it's not just about having enough workers, but also that the right quality is delivered. And then the movement of workers also needs to be facilitated in Europe. We need to make sure that workers can move, and indeed there's language barriers, but there's first of all also administrative barriers. And maybe one thing that we should also not forget is the skills that we need in our sector is one thing, but other challenges that we are facing is that permitting for solar projects is still far too slow. We have some regulation in Europe now that should make it easier and faster, but still, and that is also down to lack of skills sometimes in administrations. Grid connections is another issue. Also there, for infrastructure needs that we have in our sector, we need skilled people that are making sure that the permits are provided relatively fast. This is obviously something, again, where digitalization can help and AI can help. But still, we need people to look at it. And that is something that is also missing at this point in time.
Yeah, I mean, there's also a sort of an equity question to all of this, right? Because we're talking about the evolution of green jobs. There are sectors that are being left behind. There are people that are being left behind. So can either of you talk about, for example, people who've worked in, their background is working in fossil fuels or the coal industry or those things that are, perhaps not going to be so central anymore? Are there ways to sort of funnel, they're very talented, skilled people, a lot of them, is there a way to funnel that through into these new sectors?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of programs out there at national level, at regional level, at community level, at company level. But I think, it's also a question of individual ownership. We work a lot in Europe, but we also work a lot in the US. And we see that the way the skilling and reskilling, it is looked at is rather different in the sense that in Europe there is this expectation and there is a social network that enables you to do this transition from, let's say, under phasing out industry to a new industry, and to some extent that it is out there through the workers as organizations as SolarPower Europe, but also all the other organizations that are out there. But I think it is also an individual responsibility. Whilst in the US, all this is being looked up at an investment. If I invest in my reskilling, I'm going to get access to a better job. I'm going to be back into the labor market and have better opportunity, be better paid. I think overall there is a key drive to have to learn to do and to be included. I think this is not only about jobs, and I think it's also a question of inclusion, to make sure that we don't leave anybody behind in this transition towards a net zero economy. And we as Europe, we are really well poised to lead by example, and with the regulation that we have in place and with the net zero academies that we have launched, really to ensure that the same level of content, the same level of quality in the content that it is provided across member states in the languages of the learner, it is made available. And the message that we want to transmit is we don't want to compete with the national education system. I think the system needs a time to adapt and to become relevant to the new economy. We want really to bridge this gap in terms of time and change and transformation. And we have successfully done so for the industry, for the battery industry. We are skilling up to date around 75,000 people that they can move from one industry to the other. So we have done so, for example, with workers from coal, and they have the basics to go into the battery industry. Very soon, we are looking to do the same into the solar industry as well, with Solar Academy, which we will launch very soon. And again, we are really there to facilitate this transition and to provide a different type of answer to the needs that the European economy is seeing at the moment.
And is that sort of in the solar sector specifically? I mean, can you talk at all about the specific skills? Are there areas of crossover that are interesting?
I mean, very concretely, that's also something where the European Commission has done studies around the skill set that coal workers have. are skills that very easily can be upskilled in order to make people work in the solar sector. And this is a great opportunity because we need to reduce the coal consumption, and coal regions need to phase out. So there's several opportunities. We've been also trying to reach out to these regions in order to highlight the opportunities when it comes to manufacturing, to really get industry as well to these regions. And this is something where we anyway want to scale up in Europe again and reshore manufacturing. So great opportunities. But maybe what I still want to mention is that the just transition, one part is the jobs that we're creating. But I do think, just transition is inherent in, moving to more renewables, because it's democratizing basically energy, and everyone can benefit from cheaper electricity, and competitiveness is spurred in Europe.
Yeah. Okay, great. I think we might have some questions from the audience.
I do have a question from the audience. It is regarding the type of employment that we might be seeing in the future, and asks if we foresee that the carbon transition will bring a significant shift of employment from services to manufacturing.
Yeah.
I can maybe start with our specific solar sector. So the jobs that we have in our sector are 85% in the deployment of solar today, because we're also lacking manufacturing in Europe. Now there's plans in order to reshore manufacturing to Europe. At the same time, we have to be very clear that most of the jobs will remain in the deployment. This is where we're creating value in Europe, but there's great opportunities also in the manufacturing if we succeed to reshore it to Europe again.
I think from my perspective, what we see, and then I see there are lots of interest, yes, there is a clear shift towards manufacturing and a demand for manufacturing jobs, because the industrial base of Europe, the expectation is to exponentially grow between now and 2030.
Yeah. Oh, we don't have. I'm sorry, we don't have a roving mic. So if you wouldn't mind, if you do have it, we can take more questions, but I have to do them via the QR code. If that's okay. Yeah, that's really interesting. So, because I mean, one really interesting aspect of this is the kind of international competition element, right? So, Europe is competing. There's been a really concerted effort in the US to keep manufacturing within the US with the Inflation Reduction Act. I mean, is there enough of that here? Do we need more of that? Do we need more of that sort of thing, I suppose, in order to make sure that Europe can compete?
I think if you compare the IRA with the Green Deal that the EU has put in place, they are comparable. I think it is a question of enforcement and execution. Yeah. If you look at the amount of money, time, and regulation and permitting that it is there at the European level, it is massive. But and it is my personal view, what we see in Europe, it's really a search for a perfect answer, for a perfect solution. I think we just need to relax ourselves and as European and give ourselves the freedom to fail. And maybe it's not a question of failing, it's really just having a different outcome than we initially thought. And what I see in the US, it's really this, okay, we are kind of going to start doing something. We know from the start, it's not going to be perfect, but we are going to make it happen. And then there is this agile mentality to pivot whilst we are doing it. I think Europe needs to learn from that. And I think we have the instruments and we have the resources to do that. We definitely have the talent in Europe. And if I would look for something from the European Commission, I would really urge for really making sure that we retain the good talent that we are growing in Europe. We retain it in Europe. We create significant incentive and packages to keep the people here. I think, and then the other thing, we should really kind of stop looking who should actually start, doing and kind of say we are going to do it. And that's why I'm very proud of my organization, InnoEnergy, that we are doers and we want to really know that we achieve something very concrete that serves the economy but also the policies that the European Commission have put in place.
Great. Yeah, I think we have one more question.
We do have an additional question. I think this is a really interesting one about solar installations. Our question asker is from Turkey and says, we cannot place solar on roofs of many historical buildings. And I think that's probably something that you're seeing quite a bit of in the solar industry. But how does that translate into, the new skill set that is needed to push solar forward, particularly in a region that is full of many historic buildings?
That's really interesting.
The beauty about solar is that it's so versatile. So we also have a solution to that problem with building integrated PV, which you can also put on cultural heritage buildings. And by the way, that's the beauty generally. You can just put it everywhere. We've been hearing about fences this morning, and build integrated in cars and so on and so forth. So there are solutions also for structures, for roof structures that cannot hold a lot of weight. So how does it translate into skills where there needs to be within the industry more cooperation is also between the construction sector and the solar sector and electricians and all together. So this is why we need to have a whole new training programs, for example, and skill sets that we're looking at. This is why I was mentioning it's so important to map skills and then define the right training programs. Because roofers need to work together with electricians, need to work together with solar companies, and there needs to be a whole new set of trainings that need to be developed in order to go down to each and every challenge that we have to solve.
I guess as well, that's there are probably heritage skills. If you think about historic roofs, the people who know how to repair and maintain those roofs.
And not even talking about architects. We're also working with architecture schools in order to make them take up solar in their curricula and educate future architects about the possibilities. I haven't asked whether you have solar here on the roof yet.
Yeah, I'm not actually sure. Somebody will know. Amazing. Well, that's the end of the time that we have. Thank you so much, and thanks to our panelists.
Thank you.
Thank you.